the Iranian currency is called the rial. And I read that 10 years ago, it was relatively strong. That's when there were 32,000 rials to a dollar. That's when it was strong. But now, it's 777,000 rials to a dollar. I don't know. That's mind-boggling. You couldn't buy a grain of sand with a rial. 777,000 rials to a dollar.
You could be a billionaire or something.
Yeah, that's worse than Germany between the wars, when they used to go to the store with a wheelbarrow full of currency. And when I was here in Israel, we went Aliyah in 81, there were periods of time when in the dry cleaning stores it said the cost of cleaning your garment is as of the day you pick it up, because the cost was rising every day. If you waited a week, it was going to be more expensive. They were just warning you. It's not the cost that you see on the store today when you bring it in. No, because when you pick it up, it'll be a different cost. 777,000 to a dollar? It sounds like a fantasy story. Okay, back to work. What we saw last time is that when they went into the ark, that men and women went separately. When they came out of the ark, they were told. Thanks. When they came back, when they left the ark, they were told, they were indicated that they should go back together, men and women, and they didn't do it. And then we had 4 stages by which they finally were reconciled to get back together and procreate. First, Hashem blessed them and told them to procreate, and they didn't do it. And then Hashem said, I know what's bothering you, because I created you, that's how I know. You're afraid that your descendants will end up in destruction, like the descendants of Adam and Chava. So I'm promising you there will never be again a general destruction of that kind. And that didn't do it. And then he said, look, I'm going to put a sign in the heavens, a visible sign in the heavens of my promise that there shouldn't be a general destruction. And that didn't do it. And then finally, he says, here it is, I'll show it to you. He shows them a rainbow, and that does it. And the logical question arises, if being blessed and being commanded and being told there won't be another flood, promised there won't be another flood, and being told that there'll be a sign, still doesn't do it, so what's going on? They're still not confident that he'll do it. They're still not able to rely on that and act on it. I don't mean to say to excuse them. I don't mean to say it's impossible. But something's holding them back. Could it be that they don't have enough evidence? Yes, he promised, but maybe there are conditions in the promise, and maybe, therefore, the destruction could still come. Whatever's holding them back, how could seeing the rainbow in the sky do the trick? Okay, so there's a color show in the sky. So what? How does that make what he promised them more credible, more reliable? And I want to point out to you that this is a theme, a Jewish theme. And I want to draw a very general conclusion from it. I want to show you the other places where you have this idea, and then I'll explain to you the general lesson from it. Yeah, take a look on page 67. This is after the war of the 4 kings and 5 kings, if you happen to know what that's about. This is chapter 15 in the book of Genesis. After these events, the word of Hashem came to Avram in a vision, saying, "Fear not, Avram, I'm a shield for you. Your reward is very great." Avram said, "My Lord, Hashem Elohim, what can you give me, seeing that I go childless? And the steward of my house is Eliezer from Damascus." And as I've told you, when someone speaks and then it says again he speaks, there's a pause. Avram speaks and then there's no response. Then Avram said, "See, you have given me no offspring, and see, my steward inherits me." Suddenly the word of Hashem came to him, saying, "That one will not inherit you. Only he, I think it should be, that shall come forth from within you shall inherit you." And he, Hashem, took him, Abraham, outside and said, "Gaze now towards the heavens and count the stars if you're able to count them." And he said to him, "So shall your offspring be." And he, Abraham, trusted in Hashem. That's one way to explain the verse. And he reckoned it to him as righteousness. Hashem accepted Abraham's trust as righteousness in Abraham. So here again, it starts, Abraham says, "I have no children." As a response to God saying, "You're getting a very great reward," he says, "Listen, if I have no children, reward is meaningless to me." So first he says it in general, and then he says it specifically, "I don't have a son to inherit me." And then Hashem says to him, "That one will not inherit you. Only your own offspring will inherit you." Okay, Hashem tells him this, promises him. No response, no reaction, no description of Abraham's response. So what happens? Hashem takes him outside and says, "Gaze now to the heavens to count the stars, if you're able to count them." And one of the commentators says, "Look, Abraham is very obedient." Hashem says, "Count the stars." So he says, "Okay, right, 1, 2, 3, 4. I don't know if you've ever seen the Milky Way, but 5, 6, 7, you're going to run into a problem, because how do you check off the stars you've already counted? There's a lot of them up there, and they're very close together. It's hard even to see them separately. Did I count that one? I'm struggling to count the stars. And then Hashem says to him, "So shall your offspring be," and Hashem and Abraham trusted him. So when Hashem says to him, "You're going to inherit, only your own descendants are going to inherit you. You're going to have children." If Abraham has doubts, yes, I know he said it, but maybe it depends upon my performance. If my performance won't be good enough, or maybe conditions should change. I don't know. Maybe yes, maybe no. How could looking at the stars change his mind? What has that got to do with getting more evidence or more credibility that what Hashem said is true? And besides, they're the same stars he sees every night. You know? Why didn't HaKadosh Baruch Hu simply say to him, "This thing could take place at noon," and say, "You remember what the stars looked like last night, Abraham? That's what your children will be." No, he takes him outside and says, "Gaze at the heavens, look at the stars." And then Abraham trusts him. What are we being told about human character, human reason, reliability in these stories? Now I'll tell you the third one, where I got the fundamental idea from the Ramban. This is Moses at the burning bush. Look on page 307. This is in the blue books, if you have them. Hashem appears to Moses in the wilderness. There's a burning bush. It's lit up with fire, but it isn't consumed, and he stops to see, and God speaks to him from the bush. And there ensues a dialogue where Hashem says to him, "Moses, I want you to be my agent to go down to Egypt and manage the exodus from Egypt." Moses isn't doing the exodus, God is doing the exodus. But I want you to be my manager. and Moses thinks of every possible objection. And one of them is, if I tell them that the God of their ancestors, who's the creator of heavens and earth, spoke to me, they won't believe me. They won't believe me. So this is how God deals with that objection. This is chapter 4 on page 307 of the book of Exodus. Moses responded and said, they will not believe me and they will not heed my voice. They will say, Hashem did not appear to you. You're lying. Or maybe you had hallucinations. You were short of water. Hashem said to him, what is that in your hand? He said, a staff. He said, cast it on the ground. Cast it on the ground, it became a snake. Moses fled from it. Hashem said to Moses, stretch out your hand and grasp its tail. He stretched out his hand and grasped it tightly, and he gave a staff in his palm. Now Hashem says, so that they shall believe that Hashem, the God of their forefathers, appeared to you, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. Hashem said further to him, bring your hand into your bosom. He brought his hand to his bosom. His hand was leprous like snow. Returned his hand to the bosom, pulled it out again, and it was reverted to be like flesh. And Hashem says, it shall be that if they do not believe you, or do not heed the voice of the first sign, with the stick and the snake, they will believe the voice of the second sign. And if it shall be they do not believe even those two signs, and do not heed your voice, then you shall take the water of the river, pour it out on the dry land, and the water that you shall take from the river will become blood when it is on the dry land. Now there is a problem here, a simple problem in the scenario. Let's go through it again and see if, by the way I selectively emphasize the words, you can pick up what the problem is. God says, Moses says to God, they won't believe me. When I tell them that the God of their ancestors appeared to me, they won't believe me. So Hashem says, okay, I hear your problem. Let's fix it. What do you have in your hand? A staff, throw it on the ground, it becomes a snake. God says, when you go to Egypt and you throw your staff on the ground, it becomes a snake. Psh, that'll impress them. That'll impress them. And if that isn't good enough, Moses, take your hand and put it in your garment. Take it out. Man, leprous. Instantly leprous. Put it back in, take it out, healed. Instantly. God says, you go there, you tell them that definitely will have an impact on them. And if those two aren't good enough, take water from the river and pour it out on the dry land and it'll become blood. And then they'll believe you. Do you hear a logical slip here? Something that's going on that doesn't fit the purpose of the interaction?
They won't believe it.
Well, okay, that in other words, it won't be successful. That could be. But something, how should I say, in logical terms, worse going on here. Listen again. They're standing over there in Midian, in the wilderness. And God says to Moses, go down to Egypt. Maybe it'll take you 3 weeks to get there. Go down to Egypt and manage the Exodus. Moses says, I don't want to go because when I go, and I get there 3 weeks from now, then they won't believe me when I tell them you appeared to me. God says, we'll fix that problem. Take your staff now and throw it on the ground. And he does. Pick it up. It becomes a snake. Pick it up. It becomes a staff. That will really have an impression on them 3 weeks from now. Because that's what he's worried about. He's worried about 3 weeks from now, when he goes down to Egypt, that he won't be able to convince them. And then God says, and if that's not enough, tell you what, Moses, right now, here, put your hand in, take it out, hand in, take it out. Look at that. Isn't that impressive? When you go down 3 weeks from now, and you do that for them, then they'll believe you. And if not, when you get there, take water from the river and pour it out. It'll become blood, and that will convince them. Do you hear something extra here? Something that's sort of hanging out and doing no job? Why?
What's the significance of the 3 weeks?
Why is God doing the first two miracles for Moses all by himself in the wilderness? Why does he need them there? The problem is not now, here, where Moses is all alone. The problem is 3 weeks from now in Egypt. Why doesn't God simply tell him, when you go to Egypt, you'll throw your staff on the ground, it'll become a snake. When you go to Egypt, you'll put your hand in your garment and pull it out, it'll be leprous. Just like in the third one. He doesn't do it from right there. He doesn't make the water into blood there. He says, when you go down there, you'll take the water and you'll pour it out, it'll become blood. Why does he do the first two here in the wilderness where Moses is all alone, when the problem is only when I get there, I'm going to have a problem?
Can you just give Moses the experience to carry his faith over?
Okay, first of all, you hear the problem, right? I mean, it's certainly extra. From the point of view of what's going on, is extra. Now, the Ramban, who answers this question, first of all, mentions something which maybe you have heard. The rabbinic comment here is that the first two were punishments for Moses' criticism of the Jewish people. And both of those punishments, the appearance of a snake and leprosy, are related to Lashon Hara, where you speak badly about an individual or a group. Both of them are relevant. One of the things that's motivating the rabbinic comment is there's no purpose in doing them now. There's nothing to do with the scenario. So they say there's a side purpose, to criticize Moses and punish him for his bad opinion of the Jewish people. You hear where they're coming from now, because there's a logical problem here. So the Ramban quotes this rabbinic comment, points out how it logically fits into what the text is doing. And then he says something else. Now say again what you said, because I think it's close to what you're saying.
It gave Moses the experience to give him enough faith to carry him over the 3 weeks.
Okay, this is exactly what the Ramban says. It said it was to give Moses heart, confidence, tranquility, and strength to be able to carry the project forward. Now again, here what we're being told is Moses, in certain respects, the greatest man who ever existed. He, just being told by Hashem wouldn't be enough. The creator of the universe is talking to him. If he said to him, when you go down, your staff will become a snake. When you go down, you have become leprous, that wouldn't have done it. But experiencing it, that does it. Experience it doesn't give him any more evidence, any more credibility, any more probability. It's reaching to an element of the personality which is independent of just logical calculation. When you experience something, it plays a different role in your personality and in your beliefs and in your actions than when you just read about it and think about it. And I'm not saying this is irrational. There's something very deep about that in the way we deal with the world. So, and then the Ramban says, why did God do 2 out of 3? Because that's all he needed. He didn't need the third one. So what we're hearing is that it is a part of human nature, and a part of human nature which shouldn't be regretted, that when you directly experience something, it has a bigger impact on you than when you just hear about it, even if you have no doubts that it's true. You can imagine a person who's a smoker, and he goes to the doctor and he says, listen, you're in serious trouble. Your right lung is shot. We'll have to amputate it. And your left lung is in trouble, and with no lungs you can't make it. So I recommend that you stop smoking. Okay, those are words from a doctor, and this doctor has credibility and training and experience. Suppose he shows them an x-ray of the lung. He sees the lung, and he sees the black. I think that will have a different impact on his experience than just being told the words. And rightly so. So what the Torah is telling us is that part of experiencing the world, part of understanding the world, is having experiences that portray or express the ideas that we base our lives on. And I think that this is an explanation for certain mitzvahs that we have, an explanation. Each mitzvah could have 100 explanations, and they're all true. But one of the explanations is that we are supposed to be provided with experiences which express these things that we believe. When the temple is standing, there's a 3-time-a-year mitzvah to appear in the courtyard of the temple. When the temple stood, the first temple for 410 years, the second temple 420 years, a long time. People came every year, 3 times a year, to come to the temple. didn't mean to hop on an Egged bus and get there in 3 hours. It meant traveling by foot or by animal, people who were distant, like people in Tzfas or further north or Beersheba, other places. It took days to get there. Let's say it took you 5 days to get there and 5 days to get back. 3 times a year is 30 days. Let's say you're working a farm. Losing 30 days of work per year is a big loss. That's not a trivial thing. Yet they did it. One reason they did it is because what you saw in Yerushalayim was a vision, an experience that you won't forget. And it will strengthen you, and it will focus you on the things that you want to do. When you see hundreds of thousands of Jews there together, when you see, as the Tosfos says, the service of the priests and how exacting they are and how careful they are, and how when you see someone doing something with enormous attention and precision, you think this must be very important. Otherwise, you do it in a more offhand way. You do it in a more relaxed way. You see them portraying the importance of it, so then you also get a feeling for its importance. And it was something which the whole population was supposed to participate in to receive that kind of strengthening from the experience. We don't have that anymore in those terms. We do have miniatures. I don't know if you're aware of the Daf Yomi program. A daf is a folio of a book, which means a sheet of paper, which is really 2 sides. There are 2,700 folios of the Babylonian Talmud, which means there are, if you do one a day, it's like 7.5 years to complete the Babylonian Talmud. And there are hundreds of thousands of people who are doing this every day all over the world. And there are many, many available free shiurim, classes in the Talmud, in English, in Yiddish, in Hebrew, in Spanish, in French, whatever language you want. And they're participated with people all over the world. And then there's a celebration. At the end of the 7.5 years, there's a celebration. And they're done at various places in the world. Giant Stadium, 4 years ago, had 95,000 people. It was full. It was oversold. That's all the people they could get in. I happened to be there at the time. So it was phenomenal. No, I'm sorry. I was there 10 years ago. I was there for the previous one. 4 years ago I was here. And you go there, and let's say you're davening Ma'ariv with 95,000 people. 95,000 people. And you say Baruch Hu with them, and you say Amen with them, and then you have a stance full of people completely silent. When would the giant stadium stands be quiet, silent? During Shemona Esrei, you're praying the silent prayer. It's totally silent. You don't forget that. It's an experience that lives with you. That's only once every 7.5 years, and you don't have to have done the learning to participate in the celebration. And so you can find them and look forward to it. It's like 2 and some years now that it will in fact come again. So this is part of what the Torah is about. When we have, when there are great people die, and there are funerals, and here in Israel, you can have 100,000 people to 250,000 people at a funeral. And you're sitting here in this little yeshiva, with its few hundred students, and you walk outside and the streets are packed, in every direction packed, and they're packed for hours. So you realize you're not in some little offshoot where there are a few hundred people who are doing something weird. There's a large international community of people who are doing this. It's something worthwhile having to experience. So at any rate, that's what's going on with the idea of experience. And that you have in the rainbow. This is the first time where you have such an idea that showing them the rainbow and seeing the rainbow is something which solidified their commitment to the point where they were able to get back together and procreate and have children. Okay? We're together? Now I want to comment just a little bit on a couple of the words that are used in the story. You read a verse that says, "The flood was waters on the face of the earth." Now, then there's a certain attitude towards this book. It doesn't really always make sense. Don't worry about that. It repeats things and says things that are kind of unnecessary, but it's not just a serious book. It's just the musings of ancient primitive peoples, and may have a nice moral here and there, but we don't pay too much attention to it. No, thank you. No, thank you. This book is the most important book in the whole history of mankind, and the first 5 books of the Hebrew Bible were authored by the creator of the universe. So we're not going to take it that way. But the truth is that the word in Hebrew, mabul, which is translated flood, doesn't mean flood. It doesn't. The word mabul in Hebrew has nothing to do with water. Mabul means a general destructive force, something that entropizes, raises entropy quickly and efficiently. So it could take any form. So here we're told the disaster that disordered the world was water. There could be other disasters which also disordered the world. And that's why it had to tell you that here the disaster was water, and later when God promises not to do it again, he makes a double promise. He says there won't be waters to destroy the earth, and there won't be any general destruction of the earth of the kind that we had. And it's really important because if you're worried about the future, and if, as we said, Noah and his children were concerned, maybe their descendants will end up in destruction, it wouldn't be much comfort to say, well, no more floods, when there's endless numbers of different kinds of destructions which could cause the destruction of the human population without there being water. So the fact that it said twice, once that there won't be water and once will be general destruction, is really quite important for the scenario. And this should convince you that you can't just blindly trust dictionaries. The dictionaries make mistakes. And by the way, this is common for all dictionaries, not just Hebrew to English. It's very difficult to translate a word into a foreign language, or even the same language, and to have in mind all the different possible contexts in which it's going to be used, and make sure the translation will work. Here's an example from the OED, the Oxford English Dictionary. An inspection is a careful observation of something. Okay, if an inspection is a careful observation, then the phrase careless inspection is impossible. It's just a contradiction. It can't be a careless, careful observation, can it? Right? So inspection doesn't mean a careful observation. It's not built in, because there can be careless inspections. So it's just a mistake. So you have to understand to be a little cautious when you read translations, to wonder whether there aren't nuances that aren't being missed. Anybody here know some Hebrew? A little bit. What's a nachal? I'll tell you, a nachal is a stream or a river. But then it says the servants of Isaac dug in the nachal and found water. There they were, splashing around in the river looking for water. They dug in the mud at the bottom and they found water. It doesn't sound like the right description. The word nachal means a wadi. You know what a wadi is? A wadi is it's an Arabic word which has made its way into Hebrew. It's a riverbed. It's a crevice between mountains. And here, when there's rain in Jerusalem, the weather report will say in these cities there could be floods because the water will become rushing down that crevice and spill out into cities or into roads and so forth and so on. So there's water in them 5 times a year. The rest of the time it's dry. They went digging in the wadi and found a spring, which would be there all the time. So wadi doesn't mean a stream or a river. It means a river bed. Even the word yam, which is often translated as sea, there's a verse that says that the knowledge of God, when the Messiah comes, will be like the water covering the yam. The water covering the yam. I guess then yam doesn't mean sea, because the waters don't cover the sea. There, the word yam means seabed, like the waters covering the seabed. Yes, completely covering. So you have to be very careful about translations. And the one which I think is very important in practical terms is the word shalom. You find the word shalom translated as the English word peace And really, they're almost opposites, because peace in English is a negative concept. It's absence of disturbance, of noise, of chaos. Peacefulness means quiet. Nothing's moving, nothing's happening, as you know from certain songs. Right? It's a negative concept, the absence of. Shalom is the presence of integration, completeness, fullness, harmony. It's a positive. You could say in English that the graveyard is very peaceful. You could never use the word shalom for a graveyard. You could never do that. So you have to be very, very careful about translation. And here you have mabu, which is translated flood, which isn't really correct. Okay? Now, we said that when Noah came out of the ark, it says he became drunk. Really, quite a shocking conclusion. On page 43, the very bottom of the page, Noah, the man of the earth, debased himself, planted a vineyard, drank of the wine, became drunk, and he was uncovered within his tent. Why? The person who was described as righteous and either complete or pure, what was the third synonym I had there? Complete, pure, not perfect, but complete and whole are similar. I thought I had three. In his generations, he walked with God, and we talked about that being positive but equivocal, but ending up drunk. So, my Rabbi Zatzal, many years ago, said that there were two reasons why he became drunk. One, I mentioned, discovered much later, is written in the Zohar, after he told it to us, and that is that he didn't pray for the people of that generation. Hashem told him there's going to be a flood, and everyone's going to be wiped out. That's why you're building a boat, so people will talk to you and realize that they're in danger. And Noah just took it. It's your world. You want to destroy it? Who am I to say anything? And that's not our picture of the way a person should react to an announcement like that. When God tells Abraham that God is going to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah, Abraham's up in arms. You can't do that. You can't destroy the righteous, and please have mercy on the wicked. He doesn't just simply say, it's your world, do with it as you please. When God tells Moses that God's going to destroy the Jewish people, he prays on their behalf and offers reasons why God shouldn't do that. And the Zohar says that God says to Noah, also, where were you when I needed you? Why did I tell you this was going to happen? Because I wanted your reaction. I wanted you to stand up for the world. I wanted you to pray for them. Say something on their behalf. And you failed me. So realizing that he should have done something, whether it would have worked or wouldn't have worked. But he is smothered in guilt for the fact that he had an inadequate reaction to the challenge that God saved him, put before him. That's one of the reasons he got drunk. And another contributing reason is, as Rabbi Zatzal pointed out, after the Second World War, after it was over, certain Jews who fled from the Nazis and survived went back to Germany. These were older Jews in their 60s, 70s. They went back to Germany because without the German language, without the German culture, they would felt like DPs, displaced persons. They had nothing which they were familiar with, nothing that they could relate to. We think, because we weren't there, it didn't happen to us, how could you go back to the Germans who tried their best to kill all of you? How could you go back there? But their attitude was that of living in a wilderness. So if you can understand them at all, think of Noah, who when he comes out of the ark, there's nothing left. There's nothing to go back to. It's all gone. You'll ask me, what about his children? The answer is very simple. His children were born when he was 500 years old. And the flood was when he was 600 years old. They were mere youngsters. And he kept them separate from the general culture. They weren't as dependent upon and integrated into the culture as he was, so they weren't crushed by this. So the two factors working together are what crushed him personally, and he ended up incapable of functioning. Want to ask a question?
I don't understand how he could be so starstruck at this moment when God told him this is what's going to happen. Did he? Maybe I'm misinformed and I'm thinking this happened or not, but to not know that the flood was going to happen, that's why he, why would he be so lost as to, I can't believe this just happened when he knew it was happening? Do you know what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, but I don't think we're getting the facts in the same way. He was told 120 years before it happened that it was going to happen, and he was told to build a boat, and building the boat took those years. It's a gigantic boat. It's like 500 feet long. You know, it's a gigantic boat with the kinds of methods they had at that time to build things. So it's not a question that he didn't believe it was going to happen. He did believe it was going to happen. There's a difference between believing something and acting on it. There's a gap between the mind, the head and the heart. Many people, maybe you've read about them, I wouldn't imagine that you're like that, but maybe you've read about them, or people who say, I know I do X and I know I shouldn't do it, but I do it anyway. And I don't think they're fooling. If you're a student, there are people, again, you've probably read about this, who don't study till the night before the exam, and their grades are mediocre, and they're sure that if they would start studying 4 nights before the exam, they'd do much better. And each year at the end of the exam period, and I taught university, so I know this from the other end, they say, oh, okay, I realized it, and instead of getting a B-, I could have got an A, and so next year I'm not, and then next time they do the same thing. So the fact that someone knows something doesn't mean that he always acts on what he knows. And here he was building the boat, but to get on the boat, and leave everything behind, and so
it's different. Seeing the actual events take place in the whole world's distraction versus preparing. Yeah, I understand.
Okay, right. But when he came out and he saw, and you don't expect that because you're tied up in the moment by moment events. Then he was just lost. So those two things crushed him. I think that's a very deep psychological explanation, and it also teaches us something about. I've mentioned to some of you already that the world is full of an infinity of information. So when you have material from the past preserved, there's got to be a reason why this is preserved and the rest of the infinity is let go. And one principle, which is a universal principle for us, something is preserved from the past only if it gives us some insight into how we should live our lives now. If it wouldn't have anything to teach us, then it wouldn't be preserved. So for each thing, you have to think about how that applies. Sometimes people who study here and they go back to the university and finish their degrees ask for advice how to negotiate the university. This was going on 20 years ago. Today it's murder, as you know. And one of the suggestions is be in touch on a daily basis with other people like yourself. If there's a community at the school, then join the community at the school. If there isn't, then use your means of communication to be in touch and to learn some Torah with people every day, which then counterbalances the environment that you find yourself in, which is not only negative in terms of our values and our worldview, but it's threatening and demoralizing. You have to be quite strong and committed to make it through that kind of tortuous experience. So that's the same thing here, where he was so ingrained in that environment, even though personally he stood against it, but he was ingrained in it to the point where, with nothing like that to relate to, he just couldn't feel himself to be part of the world. Now, I'm trying to remember how much I spoke to you about this last week or not. I talked to you about the difference between the genealogies at the end of Bereshit and the genealogies at the end of Noach. Okay, so let's take a look there because there's something very deep here. And sometimes in the tiniest details, which you think of as throwaway, there's something that's really very deep. If you look at page 25, we did part of this, but I don't think I did the rest of it. Look at page 25, you have the generations. And each generation gets 3 verses. Let's start with verse 6. So you see them set off in the shape of the page. Shes lived 105 years, begot Enosh. So first thing is, when he had his designated successor, how many years was that? Then Shes lived 807 years after begetting Enosh, got sons and daughters. That's the rest of his life. And then there's a sum up. All the days of Shes were 912 years, and he died. That's how it is for the generations here. There's one exception, but I'm not going into that now. That's the general structure here on page 25. Now, if you take a look on page, I think it's 51. Yeah. These are the generations before the flood that I just showed you. Now on page 51, you have generations after the flood. And here, each generation gets only 2 verses. The third verse is omitted. Look up at verse 12 at the top of the page. Apachshad lived 35 years when he got Shelah. Okay, that's the designated successor. How many years that is? Apachshad lived 403 years after begetting Shelah. We got sons and daughters, period. But the sum total of years, and he died, isn't written. And it isn't written in any of the cases. So it's completely consistent with a different message. So, before I speculate with you on what the message is, let me ask you, how do you think it will be with Noach? Noach survived the flood and lived another 350 years. So I think we would expect that with Noach, he would not have a total amount, right? Because he survived the flood. He died after the flood. Here on page 51, you have all the people who died after the flood. Those generations, right? Those generations get 2. And so therefore, since he survived the flood and died, he should get 2. But, as a matter of fact, if you look, if you look on page 45, verse 28 and 29, Noach lived after the flood 350 years. And it doesn't say they had sons and daughters because he had no more children at that time. And all the days of Noach were 950 years, and he died. That's the pre-flood formula, even though he died after the flood. So now let's try to figure this out. Who was on the ark? Well, it was Noach and his wife, and his 3 sons and their wives, 8 people altogether. All 8 survived. When they come out, it says that Noach's sons were Shem, Ham, and Yafes. From those 3, the whole world was spread out, which means that after the flood, Noach had no children. So says the Pri Tzaddik, one of the great Hasidic thinkers, Noach was a pre-flood figure. He survived physically, but is a pre-flood figure. The flood sort of burned him out from the inside. It used him up. You see that in the fact that he became a drunk, because he couldn't handle it. He couldn't. So physically he survived, which is terribly tragic because he was chosen to survive on the basis of the moral and spiritual success that he had, which even though it wasn't as great as Abraham, but it was a great success and did earn him a lot of merit, and yet he deteriorated to the point where he himself doesn't create kind of the basis of the future generation of mankind. On the contrary, he just passes out. So that's reflected in this little snippet of text, which, if you pay attention to page 25 and pay attention to page 51, and you see the difference, and then you look at Noach and say, hey, look at that. He's getting the pre-flood treatment. That means he's a pre-flood figure. This is an example of how the text expresses itself and how much it pays to pay very careful attention to what the details of what the text says. Just one second, let me check what.
So those 3 kids are not.
Just one second, let me take some insulin here because I need it. Sorry, what did you say?
So these 3 kids are post-flood figures, but he himself is pre-flood, even though they were also alive pre-flood?
That's right.
Okay.
They're post-flood figures because, now, post-flood means you don't write and they died. And the idea of and they died is, and their population came to an end. In other words, they had children, and the children contributed to the large growing human population. What's going on? 1 second. Let's try this again. Because they contributed the post-flood. Something wrong. Okay. So the post-flood figures had children, and those children continued to live and continued to produce the population of the world, which continues until this day. Whereas the pre-flood people had children, but those children ended up in a dead end. Only the 8 survived. So that's one part of the difference between the way they're described. And Noach had children before the flood and no children after the flood. So his contribution to the growing population was only the children he had before the flood. And that's why he's given the before the flood characterization, treated as a before the flood figure. After the flood, he doesn't do anything. So that's what needs to be understood about the flood. We're all together?
I have another
Yeah.
question related to the ark. I just thought of this. That is the same word as the ark used for Moses puts the 10 Commandments in, right? Are they both arks? I think?
Yeah.
So is there a connection there? Because one is like a giant boat and one's a little box for.
First of all, the giant boat was built like a box. It was built like a rectangular solid. Rabbi Meiselman, in his monumental book, Torah, Chazal, and Science, which is only 900 pages long, it treats many of the great scientific questions and ideas of the tradition, cites experiments that were done, I guess by believing Christians, who built a model of the ark and tested it in the waters. And they found that it is extremely stable. Whether you can have a typhoon blowing or waves and whatever it is, and it's extremely stable. It won't go anywhere, but it wasn't designed to go anywhere. It wasn't a trip from the United States to Shanghai. It was just supposed to survive, and it's extremely stable. So that's a fact, a scientific fact about the structure that's built the way the Torah describes it's being built. But more than that, I don't know about that. But it is teva means that kind of shaped structure. That doesn't mean boat particularly. And you're right. So And that, I don't know what the word ark is. I have no idea what that word means, what language it comes from. But the fact that they use the word ark for both is accurate because in the Hebrew it's the same word twice. Okay, now there's another famous incident, and to a certain extent misunderstood, starting on page 49. I think today what I'll do, let's just read through it so we'll get the basic scenario down, and then we'll start to comment on the language that's used and the ideas behind it. Chapter 11 in Genesis. The whole world was of one language and common purpose. We'll check the translation as it goes. Came to pass, when they migrated from the east, they found a valley in the land of Shinar and settled there. They said to one another, "Come, let us make bricks and burn them in fire." And the brick served them as stone, and the bitumen served them as mortar. And they said, "Come, let us build a city and a tower with its top in the heavens. Let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be dispersed across the whole earth." And by the way, for those who are new, the fact that you have in the English side breaks in the paragraphs means nothing at all. They break it up because they expect your attention span is about 30 seconds and they don't want you to get disoriented. But the Hebrew side, there are breaks, and they are actually in the Torah scroll. So if you want to see where the actual breaks in the text are, you have to look on the Hebrew side, not the English side. So that's the plan. Hashem descended to look at the city and the tower which the sons of man built. And Hashem said, "Behold, they are one people with one language for all, and this they begin to do. And now, should it not be withheld from them all that they propose to do?" They're doing this, and if they're successful with this, then other things they're going to do are going to be accomplished. "Come, let us descend there and confuse their language, that they should not understand one another's language." Hashem dispelled them from there over the face of the whole earth, and they stopped building the city. This is why it was called Bavel in Hebrew, because it was there that Hashem confused the language of the whole earth, and from there Hashem scattered them over the face of the whole earth. That's the story. Now, just a couple of remarks today, and then we'll do it in more depth tomorrow. Suppose I tell you that there is archaeological evidence of many languages before the date at which this incident is dated in our history. Let's see. Would that necessarily contradict what we just read? The whole earth was of one language and of common purpose. Here it says there was only one language, and now we have evidence that there were many languages. Okay, I'm teaching you to listen carefully. I just said it and added a word. It says in the text the whole earth was of one language. I added a word. Let me picture up the word I added. No. I said only one language. Doesn't say in the text only of one language. It just says it was of one language. Maybe, and actually one of the commentators says this, maybe the situation was that the different groups had different individual local languages, and then there was one international language in addition to all the little languages. Wouldn't it be true that the whole earth is of one language? Don't they have one language in common? They definitely do. They also have private languages in addition. In periods of history, depending upon who the most successful nations were, there were international languages. At one point in time, French was the international language because they had so many colonies. And today, English is definitely the international language. Anywhere in the world, the people who are getting ahead know English. Everywhere. Because that's the language of commerce, that's the language of science, it's the language of the great politics. Everyone knows English. So the picture that you get is they had their local languages. How did they converse with one another? You didn't have a German-French bilingual dictionary. because they can all speak English, in addition to the German-speaking German and the French-speaking French. So the way they converse and communicate internationally is through the one international language. If then the one international language is forgotten, what happens? Well, now they're relying on their individual languages, and there aren't bilingual languages from country to country. They never made them. They never bothered learning them, so they can't communicate. So the idea that there were languages prior to this time would not be a contradiction to this idea. Second thing is, what was their crime? And here the Midrashim have a variety of descriptions of the crimes, and the Midrashim, as far as I know them, are very hard to put into the text to explain what the crime is. Just a testimony to my ignorance. A couple of years ago, I happened to look at the Orach Chaim, and the Orach Chaim is a very, very simple, direct, literal, uncontroversial explanation of their crime. Put your finger over here in 49, and let's go back to page 9. Here's the first story of the creation of man. 26, top of the page. God said, let us make man in our tselem, after our likeness, shall rule over the fish of the sea, the birds of the sky, over the animals, whole earth, every creeping thing that creeps upon the earth. God created man in his tselem, created him, female created. God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth, and subdue it, rule over, etc. They were told specifically to fill the earth. Aha! And what do they say in 49? Let us build a city, and let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be dispersed across the whole earth. That's a direct rebellion to what God told them to do. And we don't want it to happen. Let's build a city in the tower so we don't get spread out over the whole earth. So what does God do? God confuses their language. They shouldn't understand with them. And then, verse 8, the result is, and God dispersed them from there over the face of the whole earth, which is what he told them to do in the first place. So he's pretty clear on the pshat level, the simple level of the explicit verses, that there's an obvious crime here, and God made it, not only were they punished for what they were doing, but that they will in the end fulfilled what it was he told them to do. That's pretty direct. Question will be, what are the Midrashim doing where they describe entirely different aspects of their behavior? Maybe if I can work it up, I'll tell you about it tomorrow. But on the surface, it's word for word against what you have on page 9. So what happened here is quite clear. Okay, we'll pick it up here tomorrow.
Thank you.
You're very welcome.